All right, good morning, Ridge Point Church. How are you doing this morning? Good, man. I love the energy in the room. Do me a favor, turn to the person next to you, give them the fist bump, and say, I'm glad you're here this morning. Man, hopefully you're around someone, maybe someone you're not familiar with, but I'd love for some people this morning to get to know someone that maybe you don't know so well. Listen, we're together. Welcome to 2019. Man, I think if you grew up in my generation, we thought by 2019 or 2020, we'd have flying cars. Instead, we have Dollar Generals on every corner. Kind of an even trade, I think. Like literally over by my house up on Dundee Road, they're building another one. They're sprouting up everywhere. But hopefully as we come into 2019, we're excited about some things happening, some really cool things. Obviously, we're starting off this year going to one service. And listen to me, no hype, no hyperbole. As we come into the 10:10 service now, my goal over the next year is we develop a culture that for everyone across Auburndale, Winter Haven, that this hour on 100 Hatfield Road is the most exciting hour of the week, that we develop a culture where we want to see that we want to come in on a Sunday morning and say, God, I want to see you move in such a way, such a powerful way, that when we leave here, whether people are churched or unchurched, they leave here and they say, man, if a person's unchurched, they come in and say, I don't exactly know what that was, but I experienced God's presence. And for those who say, man, I'm bought in, I'm a follower of Jesus, that we leave here saying, man, that was a really powerful chance for the community to gather together, to experience and to encounter the presence of God. That's our goal going into this year. And we're going to talk a lot about that throughout this series as we get into Contagious over the next 4 weeks. But before we do that, I want to share, hopefully, we take a little break right after Christmas. We had a lot of energy and excitement put in our Christmas services. And then right afterwards, we do something a little bit different in that we take the next Sunday off. Just as a church, we want to give our volunteers a break. We want to give our staff a chance to kind of get recharged as we head into the new year. And hopefully during that break, you got a chance during the Christmas season at some point to spend some time with family and friends. I know we got a chance as a family. We didn't get to do this last year. But this year, we had kind of a family reunion take place up in Indiana right after Christmas on the 27th. But we were able to score some really, really cheap tickets to fly into Chicago. We actually left out Christmas night to fly into Chicago. And I was amazed as we headed out there and as we kind of lived that week, first just our immediate family and then more the extended family. I was amazed as we had that experience, just the juxtaposition of two completely different worlds. We spent the first day and a half in Chicago, which was a big city, and the next 4 days outside of South Bend, Indiana, where there was nothing. And literally the juxtaposition of the two sides of this trip, because everything, we didn't plan it this way, but everything about that trip was so different from when we landed in Chicago to the point we drove into Indiana. For instance, we flew out Christmas afternoon. We had planned on flying out about 6 o'clock. We got to the airport, and they said, your plane is already 2 hours delayed. So nothing like spending Christmas night in the airport with a 4-year-old. He was really excited about that. So we get to the airport, we get checked in, we go have dinner, and we're kind of hanging out. We fly into Chicago, which meant we landed in Chicago at 11 o'clock their time, which was midnight our time. So we're tired, and we were like, we need to go get the luggage and get a rental car. We'd rented a minivan. So I sent the rest of our family, said, you guys go pick up the luggage, I'll go pick up our vehicle. I get to the budget rent-a-car, I get there, and I'm going to pick up our vehicle, and I'm excited. We're here in Chicago, and I see the sights and all this stuff, and I get there, it's Christmas night, no one's there. I'm second in line, and I get up there, I'm like, hey, I'm here to pick up our minivan we reserved. And the guy says, ooh, I hope we have one. And I said, yeah, that's my look right away. I'm like, wait, what do you mean you hope we have one? Like, have one that was reserved like a couple of months ago. And he's like, yeah, I think we're out. Let me look. And he scours their database, and he says, listen, we don't have, when he started asking information about how many of us were traveling, there were 6 of us and all of our luggage. I said, I really need a big vehicle. He says, you know what? The guy was really friendly. He said, I'm going to give you a great upgrade. I'm going to give you this brand new Chevy Tahoe. It has all the works. It was the most beautiful vehicle I've ever driven. I mean, this thing had leather seats, and each of the seats front and back had heated seating. Like, it was beautiful. I could set my phone on the console between us. It had a wireless charger. Everything was electric. The seats went up and down electrically. Like, it was a really, really nice vehicle, the nicest vehicle I've ever driven. However, it did not have room for us and all of our luggage. If you want to see probably the funniest side of the whole trip was driving from Indiana into Chicago. My poor wife, Beth, had to sit like across the luggage, like laid out to be able to get there. But the point being is that we had this beautiful vehicle. We get into Chicago. We have a really nice hotel room, and they take care of everything for us. I really was surprised how much I enjoyed the city. We got to see some really cool sights the one day that we were there. The hotel was nice. They took care of everything. The accommodations were really, really great. And within 4 blocks we were about a mile from Wrigley Field, and within 4 blocks in any direction, any store you could want. Right across the street was Whole Foods. Next door to us was the best donut shop I've ever been to. And then literally on either side, within about a quarter mile on either side, there was a Walgreens, including perhaps the nicest Walgreens I've ever been in. Like, I'm used to here, there's Walgreens on every corner, but I walk into the Walgreens that was on our left when we left the hotel. And I walked in, I was taking my daughter over there, we were gonna go pick up some items, and we walked, it was pretty late, and I walk in, and it's a Walgreens that's 2 stories. This thing was massive. And then you walk in, and there's a center area, it's really nice, all encased in glass. And they actually served sushi at this Walgreens. Yeah, I'm not sure the Walgreens in Florida were buying sushi, I'm just saying. But this thing was beautiful, and I'm like, man, this is really, really nice. And all the accommodations were taken care of, and the neat thing was when we left, I could take the car they gave us to check in, I could turn it in and say, okay, it's you guys clean up and take care of everything afterwards. Then we drove the hour and a half or 2 hours to South Bend, Indiana, and it was still a really nice part of the trip, but it was entirely different. We dropped off our brand new Chevy Tahoe with leather seats, and there's a gentleman in my brother-in-law's church who allowed us to borrow his 15-passenger minivan. This thing was probably 20 years old, had probably 400,000 miles. Actually, the guy who drove it, his job, his career, I kid you not, this is evidently a big way to earn a living up in Indiana. They have so many Amish people, they need people to drive the Amish people to and from work. And so his career, he has this 15-passenger van to transport Amish people. So he allowed us to use it for the week, was really gracious. We stayed in a lodge, our whole family fit in a lodge. There were 25 of us, I think, and it was really nice to be able to be together. But at the lodge, everything was on you. You had to provide your own bedding. You have to provide your own sheets and towels and all that stuff. Afterwards, you had to clean up. We spent about an hour and a half. We'd been cooking our food throughout the week, so we had to clean up the kitchen, and you had to take out the trash and sweep and mop and do all the things that we have to do in our normal way of living. And we did all those things afterwards. We cleaned up, and we actually cleaned up the bathrooms and wiped down the countertops and all those things. And I was just struck at the difference between these 2 legs of the trip. In Chicago, all the accommodations were taken care of, and it was really nice. But when we got to Indiana, as much as it was now on us, I started to notice the difference between accommodating and being accommodated. I started to realize that there was a difference. You see, when we got into the lodge where we were at, there was nothing within 4 blocks of us. In Chicago, everything was there. There was nothing. There was just a lodge. And so everything was on us now to take care of it. But I noticed this idea, the difference between being accommodating and being accommodated was that really it wasn't until the 2nd or 3rd day that I was there and we're kind of taking care of things ourselves that I realized I'm actually relaxing more and enjoying it more now that we're kind of taking care of some of these things ourselves. And I think as we go into this year, I think for a lot of us, we have this mindset that when it comes to life, that when it comes to church, that if I can just kind of come in and everything is to my liking, and if I could just have everyone cater to me, that it's going to feel really good. But at the end of the day, we've had all these life experiences that show us that's not always the case. That sometimes our enjoyment, our pleasure comes not in having our accommodations taken care of for ourselves, for us, but rather to do them ourselves. And so this year, as we get into this conversation about what it means to be contagious, I want to talk about the difference when we come into church, when we come into life. It isn't just something that we do, but rather it's a part of who we are. That when we come in and we don't ask the question, how can I be served? And when I walk into a room full of people, it's not, what can I gain from this? But rather, how can I serve in such a capacity that the faith that I have starts to become contagious? You see, our desire as a church, if we look at the early church, which we're going to do a lot of in this series, our desire is to say, man, God, you moved in a powerful way in the early church. We saw people on a regular basis that were being saved. Thousands of people were being saved as we look at the history of the early church. And God, I want to be a part of a culture that sees that happen. But it happened when they realized it's not about us. It's about us stepping in and saying, not how can I be accommodated, but rather how can I accommodate? And so throughout this 4-week series on being contagious, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how the early church, how their faith became viral. Now, I know I use these terminologies. I use these words like contagious and viral. And depending on the context, they can be positive or negative. If we were just talking in regular context about something being contagious, probably the first thing that comes to mind is the negative side of being contagious. We think about, well, if someone has a cold, we don't want to be around them because they're contagious, the negative side. But there's also certain things about life, certain things that just kind of happen that are contagious, that are positive. If you're in a room full of people and someone tells a joke, and it's funny, people laugh. But if you have someone who just really enjoys a joke and they have that deep, deep belly laugh, and they start laughing, sometimes you laugh louder because of their laughter. And we've all experienced that before. Like a good belly laugh can be contagious. What's also contagious is the smile of a child. There's times you could be having a really, really poor day, and then you just see the smile of a child, and it makes your day great. Earlier this week, I was kind of getting back in the grind. We had taken vacation. We got back, and we started getting back to kind of what life was about, and the kids were still off school, and we're trying to figure all that stuff out. And so Thursday, we're back in the office, and we're kind of getting back in the grind, and I love what I do. But on the first day back from vacation, there's always that, man, I'm not ready for this. There's so much that has to get done, and how am I going to tackle all of this? And so we had actually had someone, Nashira, that just joined our band, had volunteered to watch Zach for the day while we were back in the office, and Beth was back at work. And so I just got in the office. I just started to get back in the grind, and I was trying to figure out which way was up, and there was so much stuff to do. And then Nashira sent me this picture. And I looked at that, and I thought right away, Zach's smile is so contagious. I think he had made a knight in shining armor or something. And I just looked at that, and I was like right in the middle of beginning the grind. And I just looked at that, and his smile made me smile. See, when things are positively contagious, when we see someone who, you can go ahead and take that down, when we see someone who has a contagious joy, we see this sweet disposition about their personality, and we think, man, I want to be just like them. I want the way that they live their life. I want to have that same measure of joy in my life. When we talk about things being viral, we often think of viruses as something that's bad, because it often is. When we speak of things being viral, it could be something like a deadly strain of the flu bug that has a negative connotation. But we can also talk about a video that brings a lot of joy to people's life. And how when that video really blows up, it's called going viral. In other words, people caught on to it and it started to spread. As we look at the message that the early church was proclaiming, the last couple of series of 2018, we spent a lot of time talking about the message that Jesus brought. Because the message that Jesus brought was vastly different from anything the world knew. In fact, we talked about during the Christmas series that it was so powerful that they almost had to coin a term that the love they had was so different from anything the world had ever encountered. And so the message that Jesus brought was different. We spent a couple of series in 2018 looking at what that message was. But today, as we launch into 2019, I want to look at the people Jesus used to start to herald that message, to spread that message. Jesus didn't pick, if you and I are trying to pick something up that we want to go viral, say that we started a business together, and we want to pick people who are influential to be our spokespeople to help get our brand out there. We would pick people who had clout. We would pick people, if we had the financial means, if we said, man, we really want to make our company go viral, we would start to pick people who had influence. We'd pick people who were important, people we could put up on an ad or put into a video, and the fact that they're marketing our whatever it is that we make, the fact that they're marketing it would help spread that message. that just makes natural sense that if we want to market our brand, if we want to bring awareness at what our company does, that we want to pick people who are influential, who are maybe athletes or actors or maybe, depending on the context, the political leaders to help spread that message. So it would have made sense that when Jesus said, here's the message I have, the message is vastly different, it would have made sense for Jesus to pick people who were in strategic positions to help spread that message. But he doesn't do that. Because Jesus realized it wasn't about the messengers. It was the message that's what was important. And he said, I'm not going to pick the people who are super influential. In fact, I'm going to pick the people who everybody else has given up on. From the time they were young, they were told, you're not good enough to complete school, so you go learn your family trade, and you go and do that thing, whatever that thing is, because you're not good enough even to finish school. And Jesus says, I'm going to come to those people. I'm going to see God move in their lives in such a powerful way that the message of Christianity was going to spread. And as we look at that, the message that Jesus proclaimed, not because of the messengers, but despite the messengers, the message of Jesus started to spread. And when it spread like wildfire. And I look at that, and then I look at the modern context of where the church is and kind of our modern context of American history. And at some point, I think it's because we get bogged down with things that aren't essential. We start to focus on things that don't matter, or we have a tendency to want to play it safe. That the message, the faith that we say that we possess, stops being contagious. So in this 4-week series, I want to look into that. I want to look at what the early church did. We're going to spend some time in the book of Acts and talk about, man, what was it that they were doing? If we were to pick up just a little bit prior to this, in Acts chapter 7, at the end of Acts chapter 7, there's Stephen who has this incredible testimony of how God worked, and he starts to speak about the testimony, and the leaders had risen up, and they're about to literally stone him to death because of the power of his testimony. And the thing is even as he's being stoned to death, even as he's about to become a martyr for his faith, Stephen is speaking in such a way, he looks up into heaven and he sees this vision of the Son of God, and he starts to speak, and it says the leaders that were around him that were about to stone him, they were so mad at him that they ground their teeth. They were so frustrated. They were just trying to say, hey, Stephen, just shut up and everything's going to be okay. And he says, I can't help but speak of the things I'm seeing. And he has this vision of Jesus, and he starts to talk about that. And they finally said, that's it, we're going to stone him. And that's what they do. But as they stoned him, Stephen had said a couple of things, one of which was, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And in doing so, it kind of points back to the way Jesus himself was crucified. He says, this is the faith that I possess. And because of that type of faith, a faith that for the early disciples meant for a lot of them, they're going to lose their life, the message of Jesus started to spread. But it's immediately after Stephen's stoning that we pick up in Acts chapter 8, that what has happened is that the leaders have realized we're in Jerusalem and it's not safe. Like obviously this is a hotbed. They're killing Stephen. The message of Christianity has spread here, and there's a lot of controversy. So there's a dispersion that's happening where the people are saying we can't just all hang out here in Jerusalem, so we're going to have to kind of disband and go to different parts of our region. In Acts chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, ironically, it says this to start. It says, and Saul, who eventually became Paul, approved of his execution. Now, that's interesting because if you know anything about the story, coming up very soon in the book of Acts, we're going to see Paul convert to Christianity and become this great missionary. But at this point in his life, he's not a believer yet. I mean, what would it take for a person who's so opposed to Christianity at this point in his life, within just a short amount of time? At this point, he's saying, I approve of the execution. I'm on board with what you're doing to Stephen. Within a short amount of time, this same Saul says, I'm a firm believer in Jesus, and becomes the greatest missionary the world's ever seen. What would it take for a person like that who is so vehemently opposed to the message of Jesus to have his life transformed in such a way that he becomes one of the greatest missionaries the world's ever seen? Like, what would it take for that transition to take place? Paul became convinced, but that's for a later message. Because at this point in Acts chapter 8, Saul approves his execution, and they move on. It said, there arose on the day great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except for the apostles. So who is it that's not part of this dispersion? It's the apostles. It's the people who are the leaders of the church. The people, the general population is saying, hey, we're going to scatter. It actually says about these apostles, these devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. So what's happened is there's this great persecution that's taking place in Jerusalem. And they say, hey, it's no longer safe for all of us just to stay here, so we have to disperse. So the leaders said to the general population, you guys go ahead and leave. It's not safe. We're going to stay back. We're going to bury Stephen. We're going to mourn over him. We're going to grieve over him. We're going to stay back. You guys disperse. But it's interesting to note that as they dispersed, the leaders, the apostles, they're the ones who are staying back. That's going to be interesting to note because if we were just to look at the natural way things we think would happen, if the leaders stay back and the other members of the church were to scatter, it's very easy to believe that, well, the message of Christianity is not going to be able to spread because the leaders aren't carrying the message with them. The leaders are staying there and the general population is spreading. But the general population, their lives were so transformed and transfixed by what Jesus had done, they take the message with them. The leaders stay back. The leaders mourn over Stephen. They bury his body. It says, but Saul was ravaging the church, entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. But it says this in verse 4. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. The leaders were staying back. You see, one of the things I love just being a people watcher, I love to see how different people react to certain situations. And sometimes because of the way that life happens, people end up having to move to different parts for us of different parts of our country. And what happens when people move is sometimes the things that they like and they're passionate about, when they leave, they start to lose that passion. It can be something as unimportant as cheering for a sports team. If you live in Florida, there's probably a certain measure of the sports teams that we cheer for because we're local, that as we leave, some of that passion is lost on the fact that we're moving. Sometimes we've seen the same thing happen when it comes to church. People get plugged into a church, they get really excited about church. And then for some reason, their career moves or their job moves and they go someplace else. And they don't find that same community that they belong to. And they say, I used to be really plugged into church. I used to be really passionate about Jesus, but I moved, and for whatever reason, I've not gotten reconnected. So it would have made sense that as the church starts to disperse here, that the message of Christianity starts to settle down just a little bit. But verse 4 says that's not what happened. Verse 4 said, actually, as the people left without the apostles, as the people left, as they're scattered about, they went about preaching the word. They said, man, God has changed our life. And we might not be well versed in the scriptures. We might not know a lot of this stuff. But I know my story. I know who I used to be and I know who I am now. And because of that, we're going to carry that message with us wherever we go. See, if we look at the early church, they had both an organic feel to the way that they did ministry as well as an organized feel. If we were to read just a little bit further, the church actually gathers together and organizes certain people, including eventually Paul, to send out as missionaries, and they lay hands on them, and there's organized approach, which is really important as well. But what we see here before they ever have the organized approach is this organic feel that, man, the faith that I have, the faith that I possess is so powerful that even though I'm leaving, and even though the leaders are no longer with us, we're going to carry this message. And literally because of the message of the common person, the message of Christianity starts to spread. And again, it spreads like wildfire, organically. Why? Because the people knew their lives had been forever changed because of Jesus. And they said, as we go wherever it is that we scatter, we're not leaving that message behind. We're not, as we pack our stuff up in Jerusalem, we're not leaving our faith and compartmentalizing our faith and moving on. We're saying, no, Jesus has delivered us so much that as we leave, the message of Christianity goes with us. Why? Because their faith was a contagious faith. In the coming weeks, we're laying a foundation today. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about the hows and the whys and what that looks like. But for today, as we lay the foundation, it's building this idea that Jesus came and delivered the early church, and as they left with a faith that is contagious. And my fear is 2,000 years later, we have a tendency to want to play it safe. See, I think for most of us today, we want to see God's Spirit move in our life. But sometimes we feel stagnant. Going back to our original premise, movers accommodate, while stagnant people want to be accommodated. I want us to get that because we're going to keep drumming up this idea over and over. Movers walk into a room and say, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do to serve? God, I want to see your Spirit move. I don't want to walk in and just be comfortable. Comfortable people walk in and they say, wait a minute, someone's sitting in my chair. Or someone sitting in my pew. They walk in and say, the coffee's not to my liking, it's too strong or it's too weak. Or they walk in and say, they went and changed the time of my service, and I'm not comfortable with that. Like when we're stagnant, we say, everybody is here to serve me. And we wouldn't actually come out and say that, but that's kind of the way that we approach life is, man, I was comfortable, I like things this way, and when everything changed, I didn't like it. I was out in the community the other day, and that person that I go to church with didn't even acknowledge me. And so now I'm going to grumble and complain about it. Movers aren't looking to be accommodated. Movers say, what can I do to accommodate? So this year, as we launch in 2019, there's a couple of things that I want to challenge us specifically as a church on. What does it mean if we want to see God's Spirit move among us? What does that look like? The early church had the characteristics of being both organic and organized. And so I want to look at 4 areas and just comment briefly on each one of those about what it looks like in those areas for us both to have an organic feel as well as an organized feel. So 4 areas. If you're taking notes, you might want to write these down. The first one is in the area of community. Community can be both organized and organic. It can be organic when, listen, the best thing we could do is as a church have this vision of, man, this is what it means to be contagious, is that wherever I go, I'm spreading the message of who Jesus is. And when I spread the message, I say, hey, why don't you join us at 10:10 on Sunday morning? We're going to gather together with a bunch of other people who believe the same stuff, and we're going to worship Jesus together. And it isn't necessarily an organized feel to it. It's just saying, hey, if you want to come sit with me on a Sunday morning, I'll take you out to lunch afterwards and we'll talk about it. It isn't really an organized, it's an organic feel to it. Community often has, in fact, I think community is a little bit easier when it's organic. But we also want to offer opportunities as a church this year to have organized chances for communities to come together. For instance, this is going to be very short notice. We talked about this briefly at the end of last year. But coming up this Friday night, there's an event the Lakeland Magic is putting on. If you're not familiar with the Lakeland Magic, they have done an incredible job in the last year or so of really networking in our area. The Lakeland Magic is a G League. It's the Gatorade League of kind of the precursor of being in the NBA. Some of the players are playing in the G League now. It used to be called the D League. But they do once a year a faith and family night where they invite churches out, and it's a big deal. They've done a great job of networking. We've built up a great relationship with them. We've been talking about this event for a while just with us and the Magic, and it's been really cool to kind of hear their heart on all of this. In the midst of those conversations, they say, and the guy who's kind of our liaison with them is really, he cares about kind of what we're doing. He's asking a lot of questions. And he kept asking about what we're doing as a church, and he heard about our mission trip, and he said, how'd the mission trip go? And at some point he said, JJ, we'd actually love to recognize your mission team during one of the breaks on the court during the game. And so this Friday night, we have a chance to be a part of that. It's Faith and Family Night. We're buying a block of tickets. It's partly a fundraiser as a church, but it just is a chance for us to hang out as a church together. So if you want to join us, unfortunately, we have to purchase those tickets tomorrow. So you can go online on our events page and order those today to be able to get tickets to go. But it just is a chance for us to have an organized sense of community, of doing some things together. So whether it's organized, organic, magic game, or just invite people to church, we want to be part of community. The second thing is growth. Obviously, part of our goal as a church should be about seeing people's lives change, not just when they encounter Jesus for the first time, but to see growth happen in their life. That happens organically, often through what we call family groups. Family groups are people who gather together to study Scripture together and talk about things. And if you've been a part of most family groups, there's a very organic feel to it. It isn't super organized. It's let's have a dinner together, let's watch a video, and let's talk about that. I love the organic feel of family group because you build up some relationships that are really long-lasting relationships. But we're also this year looking for some chances to go out of our way to have opportunities for people to have discipleship happen in a more organized approach. So we have community, we have growth. The third thing we have is friendliness. Listen, I believe that as a church, the friendliest place all week long should be coming to church on Sunday morning. In fact, here's my goal. Here's what I want us to experience, and this is going to segue into number 4, is that when people walk into church on Sunday morning, whatever baggage it is that they're carrying, that they feel like when they walk into church that this is the friendliest place, most inviting place they could be in all week long, and that whatever baggage it is, that when they bring it to church on Sunday morning, they can have the freedom, first of all, that the baggage doesn't prevent them from coming in our doors, but also when they show up at the doors, that they can let that baggage down for just an hour and say, man, I've been carrying these burdens all week long. And now as I come to church, I want to have the freedom to drop those things down. But when they leave church, when they're done on a Sunday morning, they say, I know when I walk out those doors, that baggage is still going to be here. But I've encountered family that when I leave here, I'm not picking up that baggage by myself any longer. See, it's hard sometimes I think friendliness comes organically. It's harder when that's organized. But we have to be willing to do both of these things because the early church said we want to make sure that we have an organic feel but also an organized feel. We can't force relationship to happen. But we can go out of our way to be the friendliest group of people the world's ever seen. We want some help this year. See, I said at the beginning, and I said no hype, no hyperbole. I want this to be the most exciting hour of the week. And it begins before people even walk in the door with our guest service team. Like they have to do the best job of saying, hey, if you're brand new here, we want to make you feel like you're part of what's going on. Not that you're an outsider, but you feel like you're home. And so here's the deal. I talked to some of our leaders in guest services, and if you want to be a part of helping make that happen this year, we're looking for some new people, some energetic people who say, yeah, I want to be a part of that. I want to make sure that when people show up on Sunday morning, that they feel welcome, that they feel like, man, this is the friendliest place that Auburndale and Winter Haven has to offer. If you say, man, I don't even know if I want to join guest services or not, but I want to find out more about this. Next Sunday morning at 9:30, we're going to meet upstairs in the green room. If you want to find out more about being a part of guest services, we would love to have you come to that meeting. By coming to the meeting, you're not committing to being there. But it's saying, I want to make sure there's an organized approach that we have as a church to make sure that we're excited, that we're engaged, and that we're as friendly as we can possibly be. The last one is freedom. Like I said, on an average week, you and I encounter people that have just a ton of baggage. And for a lot of people, especially leaving the holiday season, there are a lot of us that leave the holiday season recharged. We spend time with family. Some of us leave the holiday season recharged that we're no longer with that family. But for others, they left the holiday season being even sadder than they were going into it. It didn't live up to the hype that they were hoping for. They felt alone. They felt isolated. They gave in to some of the old temptations that have held them back in the past. They've lost their sense of purpose, and there are people who come in on a Sunday morning with that baggage weighing them down heavily. There are others who won't even come in on Sunday morning because of the weight of that baggage. We want this to be a place that's welcoming. We want this to be a place where people can bring all the stuff that they've had and feel like for at least that hour of their life, they can check all that baggage at the door in a place they can freely encounter God. We're talking this whole year about what it means to develop that culture. I don't think that overnight we're going to say, okay, next week where we have this in space. I don't think it works that way. But saying that if we do the work, if we say, yes, Jesus, like I look at the early church and I see how contagious their approach was. Like when they left, when they dispersed from Jerusalem, the message didn't die with their dispersion, but the message was carried on wherever they went. That literally they said the most exciting and the most important facet of our life is the faith that we have. I'll talk about some of those other things, but when I talk about my faith, it's the thing that most excites me. And when they left with that measure of their faith saying, we want to present this in a powerful way, literally the message of Jesus spread not on the backs, not on the strength of the people who carried the message. It was on the strength of the message. God used them despite who they were, but God used them because the faith they had was contagious. My desire, not just for Ridge Point Church, it is my desire for Ridge Point Church, but my desire for the church in our country, and even the church in our world, to have a faith today that's just as contagious. See, I was never really a student of history when I was in school. It wasn't my favorite subject. I probably favored PE more than anything else. But when Jesus changed my life, at 19 years old, I found myself fascinated with the history of the church. I found myself fascinated with the book of Acts and to see how the early church spread like wildfire. But I also found myself a student of different eras of church history, where God showed up and moved in an incredible way, and literally the whole world was changed because of the way he moved in a particular time era. And I look at that and say, God, why not us? Why not right now? Why can't we see you move right now in the same way that you moved back then? Let's pray. God, as I look at just the history of the church, whether it's the book of Acts in the first couple of years of church history, or whether it's the Reformation, the Awakening, God, I see these eras of the history where we saw you show up and move in a powerful way. And God, our desire is to see you move like that right now. And you can do that locally or you can do that universally. But God, we want to see you move. And I think the only thing that separates us from that movement is the hunger that they had. That as the early church started to disperse from Jerusalem, they started to spread the message to different parts of their region. They left, not talking about their sports teams, not talking about their other pursuits. They left with the message of the hope of the resurrection of Jesus as the thing that marked their lives, the thing that offered hope to the hopeless. God, I pray that right now we would leave with that message. Because today Jesus offers just as much hope. He offers just as much life. And God, if we live with that same, that inexhaustible joy, others would see that and they say, I don't know what it is. I'm not even sure I believe the same things they believe, but I can't help but argue that their life is different. Their life is marked. God, I pray that as a church we grasp that. God, that we've seen Jesus move in our life. That as he moves in our life, God, that we have the desire to see him move in other people's lives. That lives would be transformed and transfixed because of the gospel of Jesus. God, that we would just be the carriers, playing a small part in your grand story. God, allow us to be that. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.